Welcome back, folks. It's on to the lovely ladies of the Ratcatchers Guild, such as they are. Looking first at Miasma. Her stats have stayed exactly the same. Her playbook has stayed exactly the same, apart from the fact it is now legible. Can I really... Oh, I'm a big fan. I know this is nothing to do with the rules. It's nothing to do with the balance. But the amount of people, whether online or in person, I saw Miasma's playbook and wait, what? It's momentous Guild Ball on 2, but non-momentous on 4? Like, that is now 100% unequivocally, like, not confusable. I mean, I've said that
I think you
now.
just got that backwards.
What? You know,
I'm pretty sure it's momentous on 4.
It is momentous on
2.
Exactly, and that's my point. Like, people were coming up and saying and thinking it was momentous on 2 because it was the black Guild Ball symbol, not the white Guild Ball symbol.
Yeah.
Anyway, hello everyone. How are you?
Rats. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so
Connor's off again.
Yeah, I know, right? At least he hasn't mentioned fish.
That's true.
Erupting Spores is exactly the same. Rataclysm is still exactly the same, which I think is important. Like, it's still a 3 damage ranged character play. There's not a lot of those kicking about around at the moment. But the big one, I suppose, because Virulent Strain's still the same, so it's still that aura of -1 tack that everyone forgets. And she still starts the beginning of the game with Disease and gains it in the end phase now rather than the main. No, it was always during the end phase. The big one is Salve.
Yes.
This is so good. This is such a good ability. So when a friendly model suffering the disease condition starts its activation within this 6-inch aura, it may remove 1 condition it's suffering. It doesn't say other. If Miasma's knocked down, now she isn't, just by activating. If Scourge is knocked down within 6, it's so efficient to go from a free use of Come On Mate, which is now called Encourage, he said questionably, to just be, you can remove a condition, so A, she can still encourage, and it's anyone, not just once per turn. I mean, it's a really boring change, let's be honest, but it's a really good change.
Yeah, if you want the simple way to look at it, it's gone from helping 1 model per turn to potentially helping the entire team. You know, all 6 models can make use of this in a turn.
It's so
I
efficient.
think this is actually my favorite change in Ratcatchers.
Okay.
I think I always really liked Miasma and was shocked whenever someone didn't run her. And I think it's even less acceptable to drop her now because the big weakness I've tended to see in Ratcatchers is the fact that they really suffer dealing with knockdown, because especially Scourge, because he would have to clear his diseased if he wanted to stand up and walk.
It's the old
kind of
Catalyst
like
problem.
yeah, exactly. Like Catalyst had the same issue. And now you had to activate Miasma and then walk Miasma next to him. Which basically meant if you're against a team that has AoEs or scything blows or whatever, you could just obliterate those 2 players.
Yeah.
And now, not only does she strip the knockdown from herself when she activates, but it just makes Scourge a lot harder to deal with.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think, weirdly, because they're supposed to be becoming more football-y, between this, the change to Pay the Piper, and Exhaustion, I actually feel like the team almost wants to be in a brawl a bit more than it did before. Because they've got a lot of useful auras for surviving a brawl, and then you kind of just think that Piper will occasionally shoot someone out with a Reverie for a goal. But yeah, I think the Salve change is just fantastic. It helps a ton.
It takes away activation requirements. It can be used everywhere. It's efficient. It's simple. You understand it perfectly. Miasma is a fragile model. At 4-0 and 16 wounds, she will go down. and she doesn't have a great disengaging playbook. You know, that double disengage isn't until the 4th column, which on a TAC 5 model is highly unlikely, I think it's fair to say. But she's good, she's solid, and auto take is always a word that I'm loath to use, unless it's about Piper and Squeak and some ill thought out gag. But she feels close. She feels really close.
Yeah, I really like her.
Yeah. Especially now, kind of that, as Rich said, that reliance on activation order is no longer a thing. You know, she can come in, do what she needs to do when she needs to do it, as opposed to when somebody else needs her to do it.
Yeah.
Also, just being able to deal with a knockdown and still double heal a model is really strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I expected to see her just as much as on the pitch as beforehand. Again, I don't think she was a model that needed a lot of changes, but then we've not seen the Rats for very long. When the Rats first came along and I did my series of preview videos on them, my big concern was how they dealt with range knockdown. And I think it's fair to say that the amount of range knockdown that we've seen in the game revealed already for Guild Ball Season 4 in the form of Veteran Siren, in the form of Salvo. We know, released as of recording, that engineers have been talked about, so we know that Deadbolt is still a thing. But I feel much more comfortable facing those things with Miasma in her current form than I ever did in her previous form, especially as my ability to remove the knockdown is a greater range than their ability to do a knockdown.
Yeah, I can see that.
Cool. So moving on to Pelage. Only one change on the card. However, the change is purely on wording, and that we've seen empathy being changed from what was called, what was it, Dark Allure before? Dark Allure is now called empathy. We've seen the same thing released yesterday, that Windle has this same ability. So if you're attacking either one, you're not getting momentum if there is a damage in the result whatsoever. I still think this is situationally good. It's fantastic against teams that want to do momentous damage, and teams that do their damage non-momentously. Looking at you, engineers. Colossus, he turned into a beast all of a sudden. They don't care, and they're just going to carry on doing exactly what they would have done before. Where I do find things interesting for Pelage is she is now one of only a handful of models that have access to +3 damage. Yeah, because between... No, I'm wrong. So she can get up to +2, can't she?
Yeah, I was wondering where.
Yeah, I'm correcting myself as we go. So between Tooled Up and which she could only get in Morticians, of course, because she is a Morticians player, and Killer Male, she can put out the hurt.
Mm-hmm. It says momentous 2 on 3, but it's very rarely only momentous 2 on 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, Pelage has never been my favorite Ratcatchers model. I just personal preference. Like, they're all good, and she tended to be the one I would drop for a Morticians player, and I think that probably stays the same for me. But I've seen other people use her to very good use, largely as a battery that just does an annoying amount of damage, and occasionally just absolutely obliterating a male model that has some crowd outs.
I mean, if you're running like the Piper Taxi, where you're transporting a model from their lines into Scourge and Vet Graves and a series of crowd outs, which I think is still a perfectly valid technique, you're just not going to get gimmick VP for it. Just having Pelage activate as an engaging model and go, cool, do you want 3 damage or snared, is pretty good for a battery, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a comparator I'm going to get shouted at for, but she's a bit like Pandora from Malifaux. Ooh. She just kind of has to be vaguely nearby, and very bad things were going to happen.
That's interesting. Yeah, I suppose Silence would be the other half of that. She's a model that, for me, has more play in Morticians than she does in Ratcatchers. I find her abilities sit better with me in Morts than in Rats. That's probably just because I played Morts more than I have played Rats, which is unsurprising since Morts are one of my most played teams. But those same matchups where I found her useful before, going into Butchers, going into Corsair, things along those lines, still going to be handy, and a 3-6 kick is still a very viable target for a Reverie goal.
Especially with a 6-8 speed.
You forget, though, Corsair's lack of momentous damage finally coming up as a positive.
Somebody get a violin.
And that was once more the Rooney minute. Perfect. No, he's still a very solid player. Still, a glass cannon. Still potentially part of that Morticians, Pelage, Veteran Hemlock, Silence, and Bonesaw lineup of all fives that I'm itching to try at some point. But a nice option. She kind of fills the same Cosset role for me, but I prefer her slightly over Cosset currently, mainly because of that Def 5, I think, and the ability to do higher low-end damage. But anything else to add on this, gents, or shall we move on to the big fellas?
Let's get to the big boys.
I think we're done here.